week.
Great. So the sponsors asked me to, and organizers, talk a little bit about change management. And I think with my decades of experience, I've seen a lot of change management, been involved in a lot of change management efforts. I think everybody is in some form or another. And particularly, I think over the last 3 days, where you've heard about so many great initiatives and important topics, things that we all really care so much about. And we know, I think, we want to change the way we're doing things. We want to change the way we're doing things to achieve greater financial inclusion, achieve greater, be a green and have a green and sustainable transition of the financial sector, achieve diversity, greater social impact, and innovate. And, all of this requires change. It requires bringing people together to make decisions and to move forward to achieve change. And, as I think we all know, the rate of change has increased tremendously and more in recent times exponentially. And so wanted to spend just a little bit of time doing, I'd say, a mini masterclass on change management. Talk a little bit about, what is change management? We all have heard the words. And I will be drawing quite heavily from what we would call the master of change management, a gentleman named John Cotter, who was involved with the Harvard Business School, and in 1995 wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review called Leading Change, Why Transformation Efforts Fail. And basically his words ring true today. And I think that just shows how hard change is. And the fact is that 70% of change efforts fail, and why. And I think, particularly now where change has to happen quickly, it's happening fast, you need to be agile. It's even more of a challenge, and having the right people around the table. So, what is change management? And it can mean many different things. But I think, sort of a formal definition might be, what are the methods, the strategies used to manage an organizational change process and guide the people? And people is important here, the people through the necessary transition to achieve the desired result. So that's sort of the official definition. But, to really make this more real and put it into context, I'm going to talk about change management within the context of digital transformation. And I know this, today it's morning for me in the East Coast of the United States, but I know today that you heard about the peaks and pitfalls of digital transformation. I know you've just listened to the challenges and the opportunities provided by fintech, and so all of this requires us to be moving more agilely and to change and to be able to lead change, and that's why leadership is so important. So next slide, please. Okay, I don't see the slide, but is it up? Yeah. Hold on. Right. Okay, great. So why do digital transformations fail? Okay, so, a lot of times people were like, well, digital transformation efforts fail because the technology didn't work, but the reality is they fail because people didn't use the new technology. And, the employees didn't use the new technology, the clients, depending on what your kind of technology, didn't use the new technology. And why is that? It's because change management. It's the biggest obstacle to success. You have to have the right people there. And often, change management isn't really part of the thinking or, as embedded in the process of implementing a digital transformation. And it has to be looked at as really the overarching aspect of a digital transformation effort. Next slide, please. And here, drawing from John Cotter's work in the Harvard Business Review, change requires leadership and management. So, and you can see here, management is keeping things going, moving operational focus, business as usual. You have things, you have to keep things going while you're trying to implement a change. So how do you do that? How do you balance sort of the fact that you need business as usual and you need to implement some major changes that are going to affect the whole organization? And this is tough. I mean, this is really hard, especially if you're a publicly held company, let's just say, and you have to report to your investors. I mean, how, you have to keep your returns and your expected financial performance going, and yet at the same time you're trying to put in place something that will affect the way your whole business operates, and perhaps but it will bring value to that business. So I think it's important that one thinks that change requires leadership and management, but it also change management is not project management, and I think that it can often be a bit of a downfall as people try to implement change. Is okay, we're just doing this digitization of a process, but no, it's about people, not technology. And I think it's really important to go into any transformation effort, and then in this case digital, thinking about the people. And of course the technology is important, but the technology is an enabler. Next slide, please. So I think really the best, and I think one of the most concise way to think about transformation is to think of what we call, it's called Cotters 8 steps. And they're all really important. In essence, you really have to do these to some extent in order. You can't really skip them. And they build on each other. So if you're looking at the slide and you can see, step 1 is urgency. And this can sometimes be the downfall of any digital transformation effort, is there isn't this sense of urgency. Why do we really need it? And nice to have, but I'm really busy, and it's hard to see where, when the effects are going to take place. We got to worry about all these other things. There's so many other things going on in the world. And interestingly enough, as people have said in this forum, the pandemic really accelerated the view of transformation and the need for and talk. So that's what gave that sense of urgency. People have been talking about digital transformation forever, but it was really an external event that kind of drove that. And so the important thing about step 1 is that you have to look at this question from the perspective of everyone whose behavior is going to be affected, and everyone whose behavior has to change. So it's not just the idea of the CEO or the idea of the IT. It really has to be, so everyone needs to realize, okay, we have to change. And I think to a great extent, the pandemic did that. Not exactly the way you want it to happen, but I think it gave that sense of urgency. And then if you look at step 2, you have to be, okay, so who is going to drive this? You have to have the right people on board. You have to have it from all levels. If you don't, then driving something forward, it's very easy for a particular person or maybe a particular area that may be affected to block the initiative, right? And, throughout this whole process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, this process is going to be watched, from the board level, that has the responsibility of overview and financial performance and sustainability. So, people will be held to account. So you have to make sure that the right people are on board. And then you need to have the right expertise and diversity, and you want to have everyone involved so that, or not everyone, but a good representation, so that when a decision is made, it seems as if it's an informed decision and not a mandate that has come down from afar. So then you move to step 3, which is an effective change vision. Obviously very critical. You need to be able to motivate people to take their action into the right direction. And here's where leadership is really key. The leadership really has to communicate that vision and has to communicate it effectively and listen carefully when they're communicating that vision. And then, step 5 is really, step 4 continues in terms of communicating. You really have to think about whose buy-in do we need here, and importantly, you have to walk the talk. So as leaders, there is nothing, and I think we've probably all seen this, nothing undermines a change initiative more than have the key players behaving inconsistently with the vision. and it's totally demoralizing. And so that is very, very important here. And as part of that, as part of communicating your vision, you have to identify whatever barriers might be out there. So, a particular area that might be affected, just even give an example of digitizing a lending division that has been, very much, working face to face with customers. How is that going to change the behavior? How are people going to be involved? Who's going to be affected? And understand, what skills that will you be putting in place? Because no matter what with a change initiative, doesn't matter what it is, the first thing anyone in any company is going to think about is, how's it going to affect me? So moving on to the next steps is, this often is also a downfall that happens. You need to generate short-term wins. I mean, often the perception is, oh, this is like such a long process. When are we going to see any kind of, wins? And with digital transformation in general, it's also important to realize that, especially for leaders, especially for boards, the idea of going, having a digital transformation from A to Z is just overwhelming. And again, one needs to remember the board approves the budget. The board needs to see that something's working. So you need to think about, what are some of the short-term wins? And what I've always said is, yes, digital transformation is key. It will continue. It's not a one-step process, but you can go from A to B and then go, okay, we need to go from B to C, C to D, and move on. But saying that you have to do the whole thing is often very off-putting, and it's really hard to see and keep the motivation up, which is, as you can see here, you can't let up. You've got to maintain focus and keep yourself reminding, why the change is important in the first place, and make sure that everyone is understanding why change is important in the first place. And then finally, step 8 is, for change to really become embedded in the organization's DNA, everyone has to believe in it. And that's really the last process, where it almost becomes, intrinsic. You don't even know you're doing it. It's part of the culture, the part of like how we do things around here. So, it looks like really simple because it's just a bunch of steps, but in reality, this takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of, as we would say, fits and starts going back and forth. And that, I think, but at least one needs to have the long-term view and understand that it has multiple steps. And so you're seeing this as almost understanding how the people and the culture work, but you also have obviously the technology itself that's coming, is happening, the technology implementation itself. So next slide. So here again, looking at from a change management framework for digital financial services, since that's the example that I'm using, we often focus on the technical. It may be those that are actually involved in the technology implementation, that's what feel most comfortable in. And that's where the project management part comes in. And it's easy to say, okay, what's the scope of work? What needs to be done? What are the resources that we need? The implementation that you see here, the workflow management, timing, milestones. But what we don't talk about, as I've been saying, is the people part of it. First of all, identifying who needs to be kept, involved in this. Who are the stakeholders? And they could be external stakeholders as well as internal stakeholders. Again, what skills development? What does change management mean in the implementation of this digital? What does that mean? That's really scary for a lot of people. And communications, as I've said so far. And then importantly, we often forget about the client. How is this going to change our interaction with the client? It may result in an improved product. It may result in greater access. It may be better for many, many reasons. But if we don't communicate that to our customers, explain how things may change, get their feedback, it is going to make the whole process of the change management, both internally and externally, much more difficult. So next slide. Again, creating the internal change, again, that sounds like a broken record, but this is the point I'm trying to get across here, is that change management is about people. The leaders are going to sell the digital transformation. They're going to listen to everyone who will be involved. And the employees will decide whether or not to use the new technology. And then when they decide whether or not to use it, they're going to decide how they use it, right? I mean, how many of us have had new systems and processes put in place and partially used them, or done a hybrid, but haven't bought completely into the new technology. And realizing this is how you really create value, right, for everyone in the organization. As you're learning new kinds of data, change the way you behave, then your performance should improve, and that performance will, align with your goals, create value, whether it's increasing efficiency or providing value in terms of the product offering. Then that's where you see it. But you can't forget about the internal, the people aspect of this. Next slide. So I think this is really the most important thing is identifying who are the stakeholders. Here are the people. So, when we think of digital transformation, you automatically think a bit about, okay, who from IT, who the chief technology officer, the consultants that may be involved, and who works with the consultants. But you got to think about all of these people, right? And down at the bottom are the clients. That's, and so you have to work at all levels. And I think from my experience working more with the board, I mean, the board is often consulted, early on to get budget approval. But, how do you involve the board? What is their role? I mean, they shouldn't be involved in the day-to-day operations, but this is an important part of strategy, and that is part of their responsibility. So first of all, they'll need to know what value that transformation is going to bring. I mean, they also need to be aware that this is a long process. It's going to take time. Often you create a steering committee at the level of the board to keep them involved, because there's never been a transformation, whether it's digital or from what I've worked on in terms of transforming NGOs into financial institutions, that's ever gone smoothly or hasn't taken probably almost twice the amount of time that's been anticipated. So how do you explain that? And also, in today's world, we have to have a more agile thinking and really be able to accept failure and move on. And that is not, has not been necessarily the forte of boards of more mature financial institutions that are more attuned to looking at, first of all, the past financial, performance, and then thinking of the future in a very defined way. So getting that kind of agile thinking is important, and they need to be able to understand, the board, and that this is the role of the C-suite as well. They need to be clear on the implications of technology. They don't have to understand how it works, because what you're going to run into also is on a lot of mature, financial institutions, not necessarily with fintechs that are natively digital here, but they may not have the digital expertise, may not know how, may not want to, or be hesitant to ask questions, to maybe depend too heavily on the opinions of the CTO. So there's a lot of human dynamics in the board that could either contribute or hinder your digital transformation process. So and now in terms of what's happened with COVID, board meetings aren't what they used to be, and board directors are not necessarily in the same place where the digital transformation is taking place. So how do you communicate all of that? How do you make decisions digitally? I mean, how do you make it virtually? So, what are the short-term and long-term metrics that you can use? It's really, you have to look at what is it you're going to report to the board on a basis and on a long-term basis, and not overpromise at all. And as I said, I think one of the big conflicts that one sees during a change management process is the need for, okay, we expect business as usual to continue, and we expect this, strong performance, yet, you have a number of your key individuals involved in a major change management effort. How do you balance the two of them? Really, what roles should different managers have? So yeah, so this is something that needs to be thought of early on before you start. And so it's not just a matter of presenting something to your board or C-suite and saying, okay, go for it, because the long-term ramifications are quite significant. Next slide. So I just want to end here with saying, it's for successful transformations, and not just digital, is that culture really leads the adoption of technology, not the other way around. It's culture comes first. Yeah, employees have to embrace whatever transformation it is, whether it's digital and others. You have to have the right talent strategy and think about the talent strategy. Everything has to be in place, and you obviously have to be patient. But yeah, it's a complex process, certainly doable, but it's so easy to give up early on, or it's just for people, significant stakeholders, important stakeholders, to say this isn't working. And so, this mini masterclass was really just to give you an overview of when we throw the word around change management all the time and how important it is, but what does it really mean? And whether you're trying to change the way your institution, looks at climate or puts in place, that all is going to require change management. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. May I ask one question?
Yes.
In this whole change management process, are there warning signs, signals that sort of like indicate like either kill the process or go back to the drawing board, that sort of like that stick out for you? Like if this is happening, then you're not on the right track to actually be successful?
Yeah. I think one that really sticks out to me is if you start this process and realize you don't have the right people in place. Because it's hard. It's hard to know. I mean, here you have a great team that's been working for, many years in a particular area. And then, and they could be technical or whatever, but then you realize as, getting through the process, I'm not sure these are the right people. And so then what do you do? And then you need to go back and maybe increase your budget, and that just opens up a whole. So I think doing, that's why the diagnostic part of this is so important early on. How ready are we? How urgent do we feel? And do we have the right people? And I think it's easy to look over, do we have the right people now? And do we have the right people in place to be able to continue to move this forward? Yeah, I think that's really a key one.
Investment background in Morgan Stanley,